to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Reiser. Welcome to a special vice presidential debate edition of America Decides. It's 6 p.m. here on the East Coast. We're just 3 hours away from the only planned VP debate of the 2024 election. I'm here in New York alongside my CBS News colleagues in the spin room, political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns and senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. I see the spin room is filling up. We will be checking in with them throughout the night. 35 days from Election Day, the focus in the political world tonight is here on the CBS News Broadcast Center, where Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz will each try to convince voters they are ready to take on the role of vice president. CBS News evening anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell and CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan will moderate. The debate will be 90 minutes. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to answer questions, 2 minutes to respond, and 1 minute for rebuttals. Walz's career in politics began in 2006 as a Minnesota congressman. He was elected in a conservative district, but he's taken on more liberal stance on issues like abortion and gun control in recent years as governor. He's largely been unknown to the rest of the nation prior to joining the Democratic ticket. Vance was first elected to office in 2022, less than 2 years before Donald Trump selected him as his running mate. He's known for his book, Hillbilly Elegy, and he's been praised as VP pick among the Republican Party, even as he's made some controversial comments about Trump in the past. 60 Minutes has just announced a primetime election special, which will air Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern. For more than half a century, 60 Minutes has invited the Democratic and Republican tickets to appear on our broadcast as Americans head to the polls. This year, both the Harris and Trump campaigns agreed to sit down with the program initially. Vice President Harris will speak with correspondent Bill Whitaker. After initially accepting 60 Minutes' request for an interview with Scott Pelley, former President Trump's campaign has decided not to participate. Our original invitation to former President Donald Trump to be interviewed on 60 Minutes stands. The special 60 Minutes airs Monday, October 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern. I want to go back to Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe in the spin room. Caitlin, Trump's pulled out of the 60 Minutes interview. Why?
Well, Lindsay, I think it's really interesting because over the past couple of months, the Trump campaign has been attacking Kamala Harris for not doing as many interviews like this, not doing as many press conferences and not sitting down with mainstream outlets. And this, I think, Ed, is significant then, that the former president has declined after initially accepting. I think that really cuts into that argument that the Trump campaign is trying to make. If Kamala Harris is going to sit down with 60 Minutes, as Lindsay mentioned, a half a century long tradition. And it's notable, too, I was thinking back to last cycle when Donald Trump did sit down with Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes and walked out of the interview. That was a moment. So the idea of having agreed to the interview and pulling out, I think, raises some questions about why and what advantage that might give to Harris.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the moment back in October 2020 when he walked out on Leslie Stahl at the White House. And again, we should reiterate, 60 Minutes has said the invitation to appear on the program still stands. The interview, if it's agreed to, would be conducted by Scott Pelley this time. But notable that a candidate, a nominee, a former president, who's such a fan of broadcast television, the power of it and the popularity of programs like 60 Minutes, would decline the invitation. We don't officially know why he's declined. We'll have to wait and see if he weighs in on this later tonight or at some point on social media. But notable that he would not agree to that for whatever reason, at least at this moment. We know he's on the campaign trail over the next several days, making stops tonight in Wisconsin, going to Butler, Pennsylvania, right? The scene of the first assassination attempt on Saturday. So there are opportunities to be out there with him should he agree to allow 60 Minutes to do it. And we should point out, Lindsay, our colleagues at 60 Minutes take these interviews incredibly seriously. They spend a lot of time preparing for them, preparing questions for them. We saw, for example, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama do this back in 2012. We had Joe Biden and Donald Trump do it just 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in 2016. Previous to that, the program has often gotten the first interview with a ticket, whether it's Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan or Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. And why not? It's the largest, most popular news program in the country, one of the top 10 broadcast television programs. We'll wait and see why the former president said no.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe. We'll see you soon. We turn now to the Middle East. Iran fired a barrage of missiles into Israel today, retaliation for the killings of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders. Israeli citizens were ordered to bomb shelters as explosions were heard across the nation. Missiles were intercepted with some help from the United States. Iran later put out a statement saying its mission was, quote, duly carried out. Israel said it has not heard of any casualties. Earlier, President Biden addressed the attack.
Attack appears to have been defeated and ineffective. Make no mistake, the United States is fully supportive of Israel.
CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata joins us now from the Pentagon. Charlie, what have we learned about the scale of this attack and the impact on Israel?
Yeah, Lindsay, it's by far the most significant escalation by Iran yet. Just this afternoon, the Pentagon spokesman described it larger in scale and scope than the last massive attack from Iran, at least in terms of those ballistic missiles. I'm sure you've seen these images of the missiles and intercepts streaking across the skies over Tel Aviv. We were told moments ago approximately 200 missiles were fired, all of them from Iran, none from Hezbollah. Some estimates are even higher. The vast majority of them had been intercepted by Israel's own missile defense systems. Our colleagues in Israel say one person was killed, a Palestinian, in the West Bank, actually from shrapnel that came down from a downed Iranian missile. Some of those missiles apparently did land on Israeli ground, causing some damage, but no injuries. We're also told, as you mentioned, 2 U.S. warships were involved in defending against those missiles, 2 destroyers in the Mediterranean Sea, the USS Cole, the USS Bulkley. They fired around a dozen missiles, is how it was described to us. They weren't able to assess at this hour whether they were successful intercepts. But again, the vast majority down by is Israel's own defenses.
Charlie, what U.S. assets are in the region?
Well, Lindsay, the U.S. military has been expecting and planning for massive retaliation from Iran since August, when Israel killed senior Hamas and Hezbollah leadership. And that was even before the killing of Hamas leader Hassan Nasrallah. So they have been preparing for this. So there's a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group in the region, the USS Abraham Lincoln. I've learned that deployment has now been extended until mid-November. There are a number of destroyers, including those in the Med that took part in today's operations. 4 more destroyers in the Red Sea, several squadrons of warplanes, F-16s, F-18s, F-22s, F-35s, the list goes on and on. So the United States was already forward postured. It's been described as, to me as more than enough assets to deal with whatever contingency may come.
Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's throw it back to Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe in the spin room.
Thanks, Lindsay. We appreciate that. And joining us now is Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Senator Warren, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here.
What are you, well, if you were Tim Walz tonight, Senator, how would you prosecute the case against J.D. Vance on stage?
Look, I think that he should make the case about who he is versus who Vance is. This is contrast, right? And part of that is their experience, their background. J.D. Vance was a venture capitalist out in tech world, and Tim Walz is a public school teacher and a coach. I think you'd prosecute the case in terms of who has the kind of experience both to be a good partner and who would be ready to take over as president. And again, you go to the experience. J.D. Vance has had 18 months in Congress. Tim Walz had years in Congress and years serving as a governor. And then ultimately, I think it's vision. What do you see as the vision for this country? J.D. Vance totally embraces the Donald Trump. It's fear-mongering. It is a scary, dangerous, horrible world out there. And Tim Walz is with Kamala Harris. It's a world in which we can actually create more opportunity for more of our people and get some fairness back into the system.
Senator, you and Vance serve in the Senate together, and you've actually worked on legislation together. One of those pieces of legislation was trying to claw back money from CEOs of failed banks. I'm curious, what did you see in him that made you want to work with him on that issue? And how was that experience?
So, do understand, I will work with anybody on the other side of the aisle if we can advance legislation that is important to the people of Massachusetts that I serve and to our country. In that particular case, I actually heard him being interviewed on television, and he was saying that he was really angry about the collapse of these three big banks last year, and that he thought we ought to prosecute those guys. So I thought, whoa, there's someone I should talk to. And I said, I have this bill, and the idea is to claw back some of the ill-gotten gains that they have. You want to join up? And he said, yeah, that he did. And so we tried to push that forward. And I'm still hopeful that we might be able to get a vote in the Senate on that. So look, there are places where you can intersect. The question, though, for being Vice President of the United States is a good partner to the president and someone who's ready to step up if anything happens to the president and actually take over the duties of the President of the United States. And I believe that Tim Walz has both a better experience base and a deeper understanding of how the pieces of government work and a vision to help us build a nation that isn't just about the top 1/10 of 1%. It isn't just about the venture capitalists and private equity bros, that it really is about creating opportunity for everybody in this country.
In our remaining moments with you, Senator, I wanted to get you on a few other subjects real quick. First of all, you're on the Senate Armed Services Committee. It sounds as if the U.S. military was involved in hitting back at Iran as it attempted to attack Israel today. Are you satisfied the Pentagon's telling lawmakers like yourself everything there is to know about U.S. military engagement? Any sense that more is going to have to be provided? Or should there be more thoughtful congressional debate first before any of that happens?
This is an unfolding story, so I want to make sure that we have our facts straight before I make any comment on the specifics here. But I do want to say Israel has a right to defend itself. The United States helps in that defense. Benjamin Netanyahu does not have a right to drag us into a war in the Middle East. And I think it's really important that we get the bombing has to stop. We need to get those hostages back from Hamas. We need to get humanitarian aid into areas that have been bombed. And we really need to give a hard shove to all of the parties to come to the negotiating table and work out a peace plan for the region. That's how we can best serve the region and serve Israel.
And Senator, just quickly, we've been talking a lot about the top of the ticket, but down ballot races, the race for the U.S. Senate is razor thin. How do you see it? Are you concerned that Republicans are better positioned to win the Senate?
Look, let me start with just how important this is. If Donald Trump should take the White House, which I very much hope he doesn't, if they also have control of the Senate, this will be the next 1, 2, 3 Supreme Court justices, and this will be our entire judiciary. There will be no one to stop them. And with a Supreme Court that has basically said Donald Trump can be a king, there will be no checks on him if the Republicans are in control of the Senate. Also, if Kamala Harris has the White House, if Republicans stay in control of the Senate, that means that she will have trouble nominating judges, trying to get some balance back into the system, and that we can't pass the legislation we need, in particular, making Roe versus Wade law of the land again. So there's an enormous amount at stake here. I like our chances because I like our candidates. On the defense, we're out there defending every seat, and I think we're doing a great job. And I just want to say, I think we've got pickup opportunities in Texas and in Florida. Anybody who's interested in those races, you know, they could use some help. Go online, take a look. Because if the Democrats can pick up Texas or Florida, if we can defend all of the seats we've got, then we can stay in the majority and we can be a good partner to Kamala Harris in getting abortion and access to IVF fully protected, in protecting our voting rights across this country, and in passing rights so that everybody is entitled to join a union. So a lot of good stuff we can do and a lot of danger if the Republicans have the Senate.
Trying to expand the Senate map into Florida and Texas. We're okay with that because those are warm states and we don't mind visiting them this time of year. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, thank you for joining us from Boston. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Much has been said about the small Ohio town of Springfield, but a lot of it has been false.
CBS News' Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us after the break to talk more about Springfield and the truth about the real issues the town is facing. You're streaming America Decides.
The town of Springfield, Ohio, was thrust into the national spotlight after false accusations quickly spread of Haitian immigrants there stealing and eating pets. The claims were repeated by former President Donald Trump and Senator J.D. Vance. And since then, many Haitian residents say they have been concerned for their safety. The issue is likely to come up when Vance and Walz take the debate stage tonight. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now from Springfield. Camilo, tell us how these rumors got started and why Senator Vance continues to promote these false claims.
Hi, Lindsay. It appears that these false allegations about this small city in Ohio first emerged online in right-wing groups and by right-wing figures. And they were, of course, giving a lot of oxygen by Senator J.D. Vance and other Republican lawmakers. Of course, former President Donald Trump talked about this claim during his presidential debate with Vice President Harris. And it is very important to note that despite not just local authorities disproving and debunking these claims, officials here in Ohio, including Republican politicians, have also said that these allegations are not true, including the governor of the state, Governor DeWine, who is a Republican and who's also supporting J.D. Vance and former President Donald Trump for the presidential ticket in 2024. And despite all that, J.D. Vance has yet to correct the record. He has in many ways doubled down on these claims, saying that constituents of his are calling his office to report some of these claims. But again, there has been no corroboration. And I'm sure we're going to get to this, Lindsay. There are legitimate policy discussions to have about the migration pressures that towns like Springfield are having in the past few years. But of course, these claims are not just misleading, inaccurate, and false, but they can be dangerous because we did see threats against buildings, including schools here in Springfield, in the wake of those allegations.
Can you please fact check for us who these migrants are, how they're able to be there? I mean, I know that we've heard from the governor. He's been talking to local businesses who have said they've brought some of these businesses back after the pandemic.
Well, this is another inaccurate claim that J.D. Vance has made about the Haitian immigrants in this community. He has called them illegal aliens, Lindsay, despite the fact that they entered the U.S. lawfully and are here in the country legally. They have been able to come to the U.S. legally under two Biden administration programs. One of them allows people who have American sponsors to fly into the country legally and to work here lawfully. And another allows people in Mexico who are waiting for an appointment to enter the U.S. to be processed legally at an official border crossing and then to work in the country lawfully. And most Haitians here are also eligible for something known as temporary protected status, and that is a legal immigration relief program for nationals of countries that are right now undergoing an emergency, a natural disaster, a war, or some other crisis. And of course, we know that Haiti is still in deep political turmoil, and that is the reason that the Biden administration has created this TPS program for Haiti. So these immigrants here are working lawfully, and they are in the country lawfully.
Camilo Montoya Galvez, appreciate your reporting. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio will meet for the first time tonight, not just on the debate stage, but just in general in person. The vice presidential candidates will meet on the CBS News debate stage here at the Broadcast Center in New York City in less than 3 hours. Earlier today, both men did walkthroughs of the space with their teams. They did not meet. Walz is hoping to bolster Vice President Kamala Harris's position in the race, locked in a dead heat with former President Trump. Vance will likely launch a barrage of attacks on the Biden administration and Walz's record. And we do know who is going to be in the spin room on behalf of the Trump-Vance team, including Donald Trump Jr., Representative Byron Daniels, Representative Elise Stefanik, Senator Katie Britt, Senator Tom Cotton, and Jason Miller, a senior Trump advisor. For more, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter Shauna Mizell. Shauna, you cover the Harris-Walz campaign. Who's going to be in the spin room for them?
Lindsay, it's great to be with you in person finally, but tonight we're going to see Democratic surrogates in the spin room. These are going to be politicians like Jasmine Crockett. You're going to see Amy Klobuchar, Senator Mark Kelly, and you'll also see Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. But you know, the spin room is where these surrogates are going to convene and attempt to simply spin the narrative based on what we hear from these candidates on that stage tonight.
Pritzker, who at one point was in contention to be on that stage
Mark
tonight.
Kelly as well.
Yes, you have been obviously talking to the campaign about how they've been preparing. What can we expect? What has Walz been focusing on?
That's right. We actually just landed in New York today, coming from Michigan, where Walz was doing his debate prep with Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg was actually standing in as J.D. Vance, and Walz has really been focusing on staying true to himself. I think that's really conveyed by some of the events we saw him doing over the last few days, right? So he went to the Minnesota versus Michigan football game, and he also stopped by a farm where he shot pumpkins out of a launcher. We know this is someone that's from rural Nebraska, a former football coach, and they even named his debate camp Camp North Star to really underscore and illustrate the fact that Tim Walz is going to try to stay true to himself tonight.
Fascinating, very interesting. Thank you so much, Shauna Mizell, for your reporting. Appreciate it. Still to come, we are continuing to follow developments out of the Middle East as Israel vows to retaliate for a missile attack from Iran. You're streaming America Decides. Israel says it will retaliate after Iran launched a major missile attack today. The attack marked the latest in escalations in the Middle East amid concerns tensions in the region could lead to a larger conflict. Natalie Brand filed this report.
Sirens wailed and explosions could be seen in the skies over Israel as Iran launched a ballistic missile attack against Israel.
Iran launched nearly 200 ballistic missiles towards targets in Israel. At this time, and I stress at this time, we do not know of any deaths in Israel.
Iran's UN mission says it launched the attack because of Israel's attacks on Hezbollah and in retaliation for Israel's ground offensive in Lebanon. A U.S. defense official confirms American forces are helping to intercept some of the Iranian missiles. This comes as the Pentagon has moved additional military support to the Middle East to help Israel defend against further attacks. The U.S. is sending 3 additional aircraft squadrons to the region. An F-15, F-16, and A-10 squadron will be arriving soon. This is on top of the 2,000 to 3,000 more U.S. service members the Pentagon ordered to the region Monday to join the more than 40,000 already there.
An Iranian diplomatic source told CBS News that hardliners within Iran were demanding the strike against Israel. The White House had previously warned that an attack will carry severe consequences for Iran.
This is a significant escalation by Iran. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible.
Israel says it's keeping its ground forces close to the border to try to stop Iranian-backed Hezbollah forces from launching rockets into Israel.
If the state of Lebanon and the world can't push Hezbollah away from our border, we have no choice but to do it ourselves.
Israel has warned Lebanese citizens to evacuate the area, and many are heeding those calls, with Hezbollah escorting civilians out. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
Thank you, Natalie. Turning back to our coverage of the only planned vice presidential debate, Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance are gearing up for tonight's matchup. They're in New York. We are now joined by Maura Gillespie and Haima Moore. Maura is a Republican strategist who served as an advisor To former House Speaker John Boehner, Haima previously served as director to the Office of Democratic National Committee Chairman Jamie Harrison. He's also a principal at the public affairs firm Cornerstone. So good to have both of you back. Maura, earlier in the show, we were talking about Vance spreading false claims about what is happening in Springfield in terms of migrants killing and eating pets, which is not true. CBS News has debunked that. Do you expect him to double down on that tonight?
Thus far, he has, which I think is a problem just across the board. Again, you're introducing yourself to millions of people who may not know you. Yes, in the political circles, we know who J.D. Vance is, but this is really his opportunity to introduce himself to millions of people. And I don't think that doubling down on such a refuted claim is a strong strategy. I think talking about immigration from a Republican standpoint, you talk about it to be the land of hope and opportunity. We need law and order. That's how you can frame this conversation. But we are a nation of immigrants. My grandfathers both came here.
But immigration is a winning issue for Republicans.
It is, but I think when you're going to win the MAGA vote by doing that. Okay, but what about the votes that you need to get to win this election? You're not going to win them over by doing it that way and by speaking in such disparaging ways and by perpetuating conspiracy theories. Because at the end of the day, you're just telling the people who follow you and listen to you, you're lying to them, and that's a disservice to them.
Haima, what does Walz need to say to represent how a Harris-Walz administration will, I don't want to say fix the border, because we know that illegal border crossings have been down. We know that the Biden administration has put severe restrictions on asylum, which appear to be working.
Yeah. I mean, look, this has been an issue for a very long time, decades and tens of many long years. And so I think what Governor Walz is going to say, look, the vice president was just in Arizona earlier this week. So they want to talk about two things. One, this bipartisan bill that they believe Donald Trump asked Congress to kill. And then secondly, they want to talk about humanity. How do we get to order and security, but also have a humane process that allows for immigrants who want to come to this country legally to do so, and those DACA recipients, for them to figure out some way to get to a citizenship as well. And so it's not just Republicans are going to win on immigration. It's about a new way forward. It's about the Democrats talking about humanity.
You mentioned the border bill. I mean, Trump has said it was a bad bill. Wouldn't Vance just say the same thing?
Yeah, but their colleagues did not say that. So they're senators and they're members of the House who were firmly supporting this bill until Donald Trump called. And so I think the vice president, the president, even Donald Trump in some ways believe that this bill was the right way to go forward, but not politically advantageous.
Maura, Vance has also gotten a lot of comments and pushback from the sort of childless cat lady that has entered the zeitgeist. Vance said that is not what he means in disparaging women who don't have children. I expect Walz might bring this up because it has, like I said, entered the zeitgeist, social media. It becomes a meme. How do you expect he will pivot from that?
I would be surprised if we don't hear something about cats tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on my bingo board all over. But I just think that when you're disparaging a group of voters that you need to win over, largely, this isn't how you do it. And I think we've gotten to this point where, Sarah Huckabee Sanders then doubled down and tried to attack Kamala Harris for not having given birth to children. I just think that you're attacking a voter base that you need to win. Both sides do. And J.D. Vance, he's married to a woman who is an accomplished, intelligent woman. Why would you then go and disparage a voting bloc that you need or offending your own wife? I just think that he has to be really smart here and not do that. So if he has an opportunity to clarify his comments, by all means, I hope he takes that chance or takes that opportunity. But I just think that we've gotten to a point where it's just politically moronic to continue to disparage women who don't have children.
And Lindsay, we remember this in 2018. The blowback from the women vote when Donald Trump was making those comments then was catastrophic for the Republican Party. And so I think we may see some of those same women come back to the table and say, look, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. We are here to support things that we care about, but we don't want to be talked down to.
Who has more to gain and who has more to lose from tonight?
That's a good question. I think both have equal amounts to gain and lose. These candidates, as Mara said, we know them because we do this every day. But neither candidate is widely known by the American people, so I think they have to introduce themselves. And if they don't do that correctly, that's going to be something that's going to hurt them. And then secondly, they want to be likable. They want to be seen as someone that you can have a beer with, you can have a conversation with. And so I think both have a very high bar to reach, and I'm not sure how that's going to go for either candidate.
Mass appeal is important, and likability. And for people who aren't going to tune in for the entire thing, I hope they do. But sometimes you're going to see someone who flips in for maybe 10 minutes, and it really does matter how each candidate comes across and how they talk to both to Nora and Margaret, but also how they talk to each other, but how they address the American people. Are you coming from a personal attack standpoint, or are you coming through policies? For J.D. Vance talking about Harris's housing policy, talk about how, it's heavy on federal regulations. Okay, great, he's talking policy. Don't attack her for, again, the things the Trump MAGA world has known to do is just go personal. And I just don't think that that's a winning strategy.
No, it's not.
All right, Maura Gillespie and Jaime Moore, thank you both so much for all of your time. We appreciate both of you. We're going to check back in with Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe to find out more about what's happening in the spin room. Who are you guys seeing? What food is being brought in?
Well, we do wish there was food being brought in, Lindsay, but we are keeping warm and here with some coffee that we'll need because we have 2.5 hours to go until this debate really starts. But Ed and I have been kind of cold because, as you know, Lindsay, these studios are very cold. But now we're warming up because the room is warming up a little bit. People are starting to arrive, starting to be here. We have lawmakers in the building, in the room. We're going to speak to one of them later on.
Yeah, because Trump-Vance team has sent Donald Trump Jr., Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida, New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who was on CBS Mornings earlier today, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton, Jason Miller, senior advisor. All of them will be here to sort of shape perceptions of how it went or how it might go. And one of those surrogates for the Trump campaign, the Alabama Senator Katie Britt, she will be our guest coming up next here as we continue our special coverage of the vice presidential debate here on CBS.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, Caitlin Huey-Burns, see you both soon. We are going to have more coverage of the first and only planned vice presidential debate on CBS. Up next, we will go back to the spin room so that they can speak with Republican Senator Katie Britt of Alabama for her assessment of tonight's face-off and what, in her view, J.D. Vance needs to do to win over voters. You're streaming America Decides.
The way I see the debate is very simple. It's an opportunity where for 90 minutes, Governor Walz and I are going to debate the issues that matter to the American people.
And welcome back to our special coverage of tonight's only scheduled vice presidential debate right here on CBS News.
As you just heard, J.D. Vance is hoping tonight's debate won't be one of personal attacks and barbs, but one where the candidates discuss the issues that matter. I suppose we could all hope for that.
Indeed. And joining us now to discuss some of those issues is Republican Senator from Alabama, Katie Britt. Senator, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
So nice to see you. I appreciate you letting me be on.
One of the interesting notes in our polling, too, actually, one is that J.D. Vance faces an uphill climb when it comes to likability. The Republican Party right now is facing a wide gender gap. I know you were tasked with giving the response to the State of the Union. You have been talking about these issues. First, are you concerned about this gender gap for Republicans? And do you think that J.D. Vance tonight needs to make up ground with women?
No, listen, I know J.D. Both as a person and as a colleague. I have loved getting to know him and Usha. When you get to know them as people and parents and get to know their heart and what they're doing this for, I think when the American people get to see that tonight, they're going to fall in love with J.D. Vance and his passion for the nation and what he stands for and who he's fighting for. When you look at supposed gender gaps, obviously you see in some of the recent polling, women on one side, and then you see men more strongly supporting on the Republican ticket. I think when we start to talk about the issues, when we talk about policy and where we are, securing our border, having safer streets, I mean, you look at what's happening abroad. Right now, guys, there is chaos in every corner of the globe. And I think when we talk about those issues, we talk about that, I think those gaps close because ultimately, at the end of the day, when you look back to President Trump's record, he was strong when it came to creating jobs for women. It was the largest number of women in small businesses, the largest number of women in the workforce. He worked diligently to make sure that federal employees had paid leave. I mean, you can look at a number of issues where that matters. Been working diligently on child care issues, amongst a number of other things. You mentioned earlier State of the Union. You know, Stead said before then and continued now, strong supporters of IVF. There has been no stronger supporter of IVF than President Trump. And I think when we get down to the facts and we tell the American people where we are, I think that gap closes. And I think tonight they'll get to know J.D. Vance. And I think he'll also expose the truth about Kamala Harris, the truth that I believe that the media hasn't done up to this point.
You serve with Senator Vance in the Senate.
Yeah.
both of you are, in essence, in the youth caucus, right?
That's the truth.
Barely
that
in or just
doesn't take
in
much,
your 40s.
though. You do know that. Like,
Yeah.
I think the average age of the U.S. Senate, it was told the other day, is like 67 or 68. Obviously, JD and I fall on the other end of that.
You most
but we're
certainly
proud.
do.
We're representing a new generation of leaders, the next generation stepping up and fighting to preserve the America we know and love for our kids.
What is it about him as a senator that maybe voters haven't seen that gives us some sense of how he would serve in the role as vice president and as head of the Senate?
Yeah,
Because
so
that is one of the jobs they'd have to.
there are a number of things. Look, JD is unafraid to do hard things. No matter what the task in front of us, he digs in and he gets to the bottom of it. He doesn't accept the common answer. He wants to understand why it's a problem, get to the root of it, and figure out an actual solution. When you look at everything he did, particularly, let's rewind to when we had the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, and then the acquisition of First Republic. JD was first out of the gate to say these executives can't keep these bonuses and this additional pay that they got. The American people deserve better. He fights for everyday Americans. So whether it's that or what you saw him do, obviously, with the tragedy that occurred there in Ohio, he's there to make sure that the American dream is available and ready for every person across this country. He wants to change and close the gap between the have and the have-nots, and he's unwilling to to speak truth to power. And you'll see that tonight. He is brilliant too, and his ability to know the issues and then fight diligently for a solution that puts American people first, I think, is ultimately what our country needs. Because if you look at us right now, we've had 3.5 years of Kamala Harris's leadership. And there is no way that she can answer that question, are you better off? She's refused to answer it 3 times. I think you'll see Tim Walz refuse to answer that tonight, because the truth is we're not. Our border is less secure. Our streets are less safe. And look at the chaos across the globe. We need real leaders, and J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are the leaders that we need.
Quick policy question on the economy. Donald Trump has proposed tariffs on a lot of things as a way to pay for some of his proposals. Mitch McConnell says he doesn't like that plan of tariffs. Donald Trump has said that he can go around Congress, and he doesn't care what Congress says. He wants to go around them. Are you comfortable with that?
Look, I take my Article 1 responsibilities very seriously, and certainly want to make sure that Congress does a better job of actually doing our job. If you look at what we've done under Chuck Schumer, we haven't even passed any appropriations bills. Not even one has been put on the floor this year. Guys, that's completely and totally ridiculous. The American people deserve better. So, yes, I want to see Congress more engaged. But look, when you look at Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, what they want to do is put American workers back in business. They want America to build again. They want us to increase our manufacturing. They look at what happened during COVID, and they know we must secure up our critical supply chain. I mean, look at what you're seeing right now. You've got Putin's aggression into Russia. You've got Israel and the Middle East actually on fire. And you have Xi Jinping saying, it's not an if, but a when I take Taiwan. So when we look at the fact that we get majority of our critical minerals from China, when we look at the fact that so many of the things, whether it be pharmaceuticals or others, are made in different places, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump know we have to onshore these opportunities to protect the American people. So as they work to build America back up, it's about creating jobs and opportunity for people who live here, and ultimately for a stronger economy and a stronger America.
Senator, we have to go, unfortunately, but we're former congressional reporters. You're a former Senate appropriations staffer. We're going to nerd out about the appropriations process.
I would love to. It's my favorite thing to do, because I am on a mission that we are going to get this place back working. The last thing I will say on that, you know, it has been 30 years since we passed all 12 bills individually and on time.
It's a problem.
That is a problem. Every time we pass the buck, it costs the American people more money. And so it's time for us to do our job, do what everyone sent there, make hard decisions and do hard things. And I'm ready for it. And I know J.D. Vance is, and certainly Donald Trump's done it before, and he's going to do it again.
Speaking of money, we got to go make some. So we appreciate you being here. Alabama Senator Katie Britt, thank you so much.
And coming up, for much of Gen Z, the 2024 election will be the very first one where they can actually vote.
A founding partner of PUC will join us to discuss the role age and gender demographics play in the race for the White House. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides.
Welcome back to a special edition of America Decides. Both the Harris and Trump campaigns are spending millions of dollars on advertisements targeting specific demographics. Recent CBS News polling shows 64% of likely voters under the age of 30 have Vice President Kamala Harris as their choice for president. 36% said they would vote for former President Trump. Peter Hamby joins us now. He is a founding partner at Puck and the host of Snapchat's Good Luck America. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Big night for CBS.
According to Pew Research, President Biden won 59% of voters under 30 in 2020. How does the Harris campaign compare?
Look, they are getting there. When Biden left the race, it was the Democrats were in bad shape. Joe Biden was not winning young voters by the margins that he needed to win the election. The general thinking, at least since Barack Obama's first election in 2008, is that Democrats need to win about 60% of the youth vote, that vote from voters between the ages of 18 and 29. Kamala Harris is getting there, but it depends on the poll that you're looking at. At the Harvard Youth Poll, which is kind of seen as the gold standard these days of looking at how Gen Z is thinking about politics, Kamala Harris is winning likely young voters by 31 points. But if you look at the New York Times Siena poll that just came out a few days ago, she's winning that same demo by 23 points, according to that poll. If you look at the Harvard Youth Poll, Joe Biden is winning young Hispanic voters by about 30 points. If you look at the NBC Telemundo poll that just came out a few days ago, she's only winning by 10 points. So it depends on the data. It's hard to poll this demographic, especially first-time voters who are only just registering. And remember, some of these people who are going to be voting in this election, they were only in middle school or high school when Donald Trump first came down that escalator in 2015. So this is all they've known. This political era that we live in, we take for granted that Donald Trump might be newer on the scene. This generation doesn't. But Kamala Harris is making an effort lately, going on the Up and Smoke podcast to talk basketball, but also about young black men. And then she has influencers going out there on TikTok talking about how Trump's tariffs would raise the prices of alcohol. And then she had Dave Bautista come out the other day because she needs to get that young male vote. So she is working on things, and I think it's showing up in the polls so far, but she does have work to do. The good news for her is she is dominating among young women, and that could make up for any losses among young men.
What can you tell us about the Gen Z voter gender gap?
It's very interesting. The young men in particular have moved away from the Democratic Party in a pretty remarkable way in just the last 4 years. If you go back to 2020, Joe Biden probably won young men by about 23 points, won young women by about 30 points. Right now, Kamala Harris is winning young women by almost 50 points. That is remarkable. But she's only winning young men by 17 points, a massive gender gap. Look, she's still winning young men, but it's clear that whether it's the economy or whether it's Trump's sort of cultural appeal or his media strategy of going on podcasts like Lex Friedman and Theo Vaughn, this demographic has come up watching YouTubers, looking at Snapchat, listening to podcasts. That's where they're getting their information. And Donald Trump has very much leaned into that. I'm currently in North Carolina, obviously a battleground state. Over the weekend when I was watching football on YouTube TV, streaming, I was getting nailed with ads from Trump Super PAC, MAGA Inc., the Trump campaign, just going after Kamala Harris. And I was seeing more Trump ads than Kamala ads because I am a target demo for the Trump campaign, theoretically, a man between 18 and 44 watching sports on streaming. So the Trump campaign is going very hard at that. So are their allies. But again, Kamala Harris can make up for whatever deficit she has with young men by her enormous support with young women.
Politics aside, we're glad you're a fan of streaming. We are here too. Peter Hamby, thank you.
Thanks.
We're going to take a quick break, but the stage is set here at the Broadcast Center in New York City as the two men vying to be the next Vice President of the United States get set to square off on the issues. Stay with CBS News 24/7.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know what's at the end of this little journey? Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Reiser. Welcome to a special vice presidential debate edition of America Decides. It's 7 p.m. on the East Coast, and we are just 2 hours away from the only planned VP debate of the 2024 election. I'm here in New York alongside my CBS News colleagues who are in the center of it all in the spin room. Political correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns and senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. We'll be checking in with them throughout the night and just a little bit. This will be the sole chance Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance get to meet publicly on a debate stage. Tonight's 90-minute face-off will be moderated by CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell and CBS News chief foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan. Both candidates have walked through the set and are expected back at the broadcast center in the next hour. When they step up on the debate stage tonight, it will be the first time the two men will meet in person. The candidates are likely to touch on issues like the economy, abortion, immigration, and the crisis in the Middle East, where tensions escalated just hours before the debate. 60 Minutes has announced its primetime election special. Vice President Harris will speak with correspondent Bill Whitaker. After initially accepting 60 Minutes' request for an interview with Scott Pelley, former President Trump's campaign has decided not to participate. Our original invitation to former President Trump to be interviewed by 60 Minutes stands. The special 60 Minutes airs Monday, October 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern. So let's go back to Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe. A lot has changed in the few hours since we started. The room has really filled out.
It has.
It has. Good to be with you, Lindsay.
It is. And you know, Lindsay, you're at one end of this massive complex here in Manhattan on West 57th Street. We're at the other end. Our friends from CBS Sports are down the hall, and the debate itself is literally through that wall in one of the many studios here in this big building. And, you know, normally these things have been held on university campuses or at like the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, not in the CBS Broadcast Center ever before. Finn Gomez, our political director, is now with us here again. What have you learned in the last few hours as we get ready for this debate?
Well, there's a couple things. I do want to add that CBS was the first one to have a televised presidential debate in 1960. Just a reminder for those history.
At WBBM CBS Chicago.
Of course you would know that.
Trivia.
Absolutely, but yes.
Trivia you can use at your social
Absolutely,
outings.
yes. And
there are pictures on the wall in that newsroom. If you're watching in Chicago at CBS Chicago, you know.
Very famous, very famous. A couple things I've been hearing is, one is that I have heard from sources close to the Trump campaign that we've been hearing some of these. They've been sort of like alerting in a way this past couple of weeks of certain hits, kind of like signaling that they might be doing these hits against that Vance may be going after Walz on certain issues, right? Including immigration, like the whole stolen valor argument that we're hearing back and forth.
Veteran rhetoric.
Right, on his military record. But what I'm told is there's two main focuses. One is that is a little bit. There's a little bit of red herrings, if you will, maybe a school of red herrings there. But the two areas that he will focus on is one, really introduce himself to the American viewing public. And also because it's essentially because like right out of the gates he had sort of like some sort of a like negative sort of just like rollout, if you will. Rough start. Thank you. That's a much better way to put it. And also in our polling, it shows that there's much more enthusiasm for those voting for Harris Walz for the VP candidate than there are for Vance, right? So one thing is introducing himself to the American public. And two is instead of really going after Walz, which I'm sure he will, but really go after Vice President Harris and Joe Biden, and just to continue to tie him back to that administration.
It's traditionally what the running mate's supposed to do in a setting like this, right?
But so that will be more of his focus. That's what I've been told.
Both of you track the Trump campaign much closer than I do. What do we make of their decision to say no to 60 Minutes?
Personally, I think it's a lost opportunity, right? I mean, especially since the Trump campaign has been arguing since Kamala Harris assumed the nomination, that she has been skirting interviews, that she hasn't sat down with with Main Street. She sat down with CNN, but she hasn't been doing. Donald Trump prides himself on taking lots of questions from the press in press conferences, that he's constantly talking to the press and taking these questions. This has been a central criticism that he has been waging against Kamala Harris. So now for her to sit down and do that 60 Minutes interview and for him to not anymore, I think that blunts that criticism a bit.
And with 34 days to go until the November 5th election, you're looking at this massive audience. 35 days today, 34 days tomorrow when it would air, right?
High tech.
But 35
days.
It's a lot better than my whiteboard, a lot neater. But yeah, I mean, why would you not want this focus on you from this huge crowd of a lot of, I'm assuming here, but a lot of potential voters, right, that are in that crowd demographic. Why not? It seems like a missed opportunity.
And it's interesting too. Sorry, Ed.
Well, just that his campaign has suggested that there was nothing ever scheduled and that there would be live fact-checking. First of all, it's a taped program. If there were to be live fact-checking, that would be part of a normal standard interview that anyone would do with a political candidate.
The same would be applied to Kamala Harris.
You might say, no, sir, that's not quite what it is. Right. It's this. So he doesn't want to be challenged, in essence.
What's interesting, too, is that when you talk to the Trump campaign, they believe that the voters that they are targeting in these battleground states are not paying attention to mainstream media audiences. And you'll notice that, as we all have, that he has been doing lots of podcasts and he's been doing, interviews with non-traditional sources.
And so has she.
And so has she, exactly. And so it's targeting those voters in a different kind of way, trying to get to the media that they believe that they're watching.
Yeah. And who has he been targeting primarily? It's been young male voters.
Right.
The campaign really thinks they can bank on that demographic, which is, again, 35 days to go. And maybe that's not like a large swath of the voters or viewers, perhaps, on the special. But to me, it still is a missed opportunity. Yes, he has not done non-traditional. He's been doing non-traditional media. But still, I mean, so many people can view.
What's interesting, too, as we're kind of bringing this back to the vice presidential debate, is that Tim Walz has not really been out there as much talking to the press either. He's been doing rallies and he's been doing kind of retail stops, but this is a moment for him to be in a kind of setting that he hasn't really been in on this stage. Right. I mean, the Vance team argues that Vance has been taking questions from the media at every stop, that he's been going on the Sunday shows, that's kind of been part of his conditioning. No, and Trump hasn't either. But for Walz, it is interesting to see kind of what the challenge is for him here.
Walz does, Trump does take a lot more questions in from, reporters. As you know, you've been in a couple of his press conferences when he does take questions, right? But I think there is a sense from the Harris-Walz side that they're playing it safe sometimes, right? They make no errors, right? No errors. Playing a little bit of cover defense. Yeah. They feel that they can sit on that.
Well, we're looking forward to 60 Minutes on Monday. First, we're looking forward to this debate, which now happens in just under 2 hours. Finn Gomez, our political director.
That's right.
Chiefly responsible for putting all this together. Good luck to you as the night rolls on. We'll be here in the spin room, Lindsay, just down the hall from the NFL Today and just down the hall from you. Back over to you at the other end of this massive CBS Broadcast Center.
Well, we'll see you guys soon. Thank you. We turn now to the Middle East as Iran fired rounds of missiles at Israel today. The White House says roughly 200 ballistic missiles were fired from Iran and that U.S. military vessels in the area helped fend off the strikes. The IDF has already vowed retaliation. U.S. officials say the Biden administration will consult with Israel on next steps.
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event. And it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time.
CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now. Weijia, how is the U.S. planning to respond to this latest escalation?
Well, Lindsay, it really isn't up to the U.S., although they are consulting very closely with Israel. It's going to be Israel's ultimate decision how to retaliate, if at all, which, of course, we know they already said, of course, they would, and what consequences there will be. Although the White House has been very clear since even before the strike happened that there would be, quote, severe consequences. We know that back in April, when Iran also launched an attack on Israel, there were a hefty number of U.S. sanctions against Iranian leaders, against its missile drone program. And so that could be the case as well. I asked the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, today what those consequences would look like. And he and President Biden both said that that remains to be seen, but reiterated that they would be severe, Lindsay. So this is in coordination with Israel. Of course, this attack just unfolded. So they're going to do a lot of assessments and calculations to determine the next steps.
When Jake Sullivan spoke to the White House press corps, he had said that he was asked whether President Biden would speak with Netanyahu, and he said he had nothing to announce from the podium, but that the president was tracking this minute by minute. Has anything changed in those few hours?
Well, after that, we also had a chance to hear from President Biden, who was asked the same question. And he said they had not spoken since the strike happened, but that he planned to, although he did not give any time frame for that. But it is notable, Lindsay, that Biden said the same thing a few days ago, and that was before the strike, that he wanted to talk to Netanyahu because, of course, Netanyahu did not agree to the ceasefire that the president was pushing for, which is why the strike happened today. Because it was in retaliation for for Israel's strike that killed a Hezbollah leader. And so, these two leaders, they have not spoken since all of these tensions have escalated. But again, the president says he wants to speak to Netanyahu at some point.
Weijia Jiang, thank you.
Sure.
The economy remains one of the key issues for voters ahead of the election. We'll take a look at economic priorities from both campaigns and how a port strike affecting the East Coast and Gulf Coast could play a major role. You're streaming America Decides. Tens of thousands of dock workers at ports along the East and Gulf Coast have gone on strike. The union representing those workers has been locked in a labor dispute with the port operators. They're demanding pay raises and protections from automation. Former President Trump addressed the strike in a new statement out tonight, saying, quote, "The situation should never have come to this," adding American workers should be able to negotiate for better wages. He also blames Harris for inflation, which he says caused the strike. CBS News senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent joins us now from Los Angeles. Jolene, good to see you. What will the economic impact of this port strike be?
Lindsay, great to be with you. We're talking about 25,000 workers from Boston all the way to Houston who've gone on strike, who've taken to picket these issues and these benefits that they're looking for. Overall, according to JP Morgan Chase, we can expect this to cost the American economy about $5 billion a day. And the real concern going forward is if this is a protracted strike, it could have an impact on supplies from perishable foods, cars, and construction supplies. But the good news here is that some of the essentials out there that New York Governor Hochul has warned about will not be affected. So we're talking about home heating oil, diesel, gas. So there has been an overall warning to consumers out there. You don't need to panic. You don't need to go out and stock up on a lot of the supplies you may be worried about. Both sides obviously hoping to get to some kind of resolution here, but it could be a very, very costly strike as these ports are essential to all of our economic activity, Lindsay.
Jolene, let's shift now and talk about, of course, tonight's events and the economy. Voters consistently name the economy as a top issue. Their policies are very divergent, and economists have actually had skepticism over both of their proposals. What are the key differences between the campaign's economic pitches?
Yeah, we expect to hear from Walz and Vance tonight. Very, very different perspectives that largely support their respective tickets. That is obviously going to be the case as they try to push the Trump and Harris agendas, both of which have, put out these ideas that largely contingent on passing Congress or getting additional approvals. These are very much ideas that are on the table that will be difficult to accomplish regardless of which side you look at. So we do know, if you look at the overall economy right now, the government data is pretty strong when it comes to how the economy has performed, but we do know that grocery prices over the last 4 years have gone up 21% since President Biden took office. Average hourly wages are up, outpacing inflation, which is a good thing. But as Vice President Harris and the candidate Walz have explained, a lot of Americans aren't feeling that. So you can expect to hear from the Harris ticket from Walz that there is more work to be done, whereas Vance is expected to hammer on the inflation issue and continue to support the tariffs, on imported goods that so many economists have told us will actually cost the average American taxpayer more than $1,000 a year if they go through. So we do know that Walz will likely be supporting the $25,000 down payment assistance plan that Vice President Harris has been pushing. We also know tax incentives have also been proposed, so we expect to hear more on that front. Whereas when you look at former President Trump, he has proposed changing regulations and making federal land available for housing and trying to propose solutions that way. You can expect to hear from Vance on that topic. Also, immigration folds into the economy here. President Trump has said he would like to deport 15 to 20 million undocumented workers. He believes that those individuals contribute to the housing shortage. But of course, when it comes to the housing supply situation, a lot of workers in that group certainly would be contributing to possibly more housing supply in the long run. So a lot of complicated issues here, but expect it to be pocketbook and sticking with what their bosses essentially have said already on the campaign trail.
A lot to listen for tonight, Jolene Kent. Thank you.
Thanks.
Several baseless claims were made regarding the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election. And since then, one man has gone around the nation to promote hand-counting votes, claiming it to be the most efficient way to determine a winner. However, one Texas town that went this route found flaws with the method. Major Garrett gives us a closer look.
For 2 years, Mark Cook has crisscrossed America's political battlegrounds in his RV, preaching a kind of low-tech, election-doubting gospel.
But we're told, trust the machines. They're wonderful. They're perfect. And that is a way to manipulate an election.
Cook and his hand count roadshow are part of an election conspiracy movement that's been growing since 2020.
We used to count our votes ourselves.
One that holds since some voting machines can be hacked and vote manipulation is possible, the only count to be trusted is an old-fashioned hand count.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm back.
On this night, Cook is back in deep red Gillespie County, Texas, where last year
0.1% of Texas still hand counts.
He convinced Republicans here who run their own primaries to join the small minority that hand count. Hundreds of volunteers stayed at this wine bar until 4:30 in the morning to count roughly 8,000 votes, with numerous errors.
We only have 13 precincts, 12 of which turned in final tally sheets that were inaccurate. We sort of began.
Jim Riley oversees elections in Gillespie County.
The hand counting, in my opinion, did nothing to improve elections in the county.
Riley, a Republican, says Gillespie's systems were already top-notch. Paper ballots tallied by a state-approved scanner and then verified for accuracy.
As much as you've opened up transparency and created visibility and reassurance, it still, for some, hasn't been enough.
No, and for some it won't ever be enough.
Something didn't smell right.
Mo Saidi was the Republican chair of Gillespie County when the hand count roadshow came to town.
And nobody provided a single iota of evidence. Nobody could say, really, what are we solving? So we were chasing this elusive problem that never existed.
Numerous studies have shown hand counts to be less accurate, more costly, and more time-consuming. But that hasn't stopped Cook from preaching.
And I'm loving spreading these seeds every county I go to.
We tried to ask him some basic questions. First in Michigan, he drove away. And again in Pennsylvania.
Major Garrett, CBS News. Will you have any time to talk to me?
Oh, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking.
No, I know. Beforehand.
No.
Election experts worry about Cook's motive.
The day after the election through January 20th, if you thought 2020 was nasty, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Even in the wake of Gillespie County's hand count failure, the hardened hand count faction is flooding county meetings, demanding change before November and dividing the community.
In retrospect, the hand count experience here has been a net what?
I think it's a net loss. If you don't like hand counting, you're evil.
Evil over a solution in search of a problem. Gillespie County's tale should be a warning for hand count advocates everywhere.
Major thanks. We're counting the minutes until the one and only planned vice presidential debate of this cycle. Does the undercard matchup matter? We are going to discuss with our stellar panel next. You're streaming America Decides. We've been closely following developments in the Middle East. Iran launched nearly 200 missiles at Israel earlier today in what the White House is calling a significant escalation. So far, the Israeli military has reported no casualties from the attack. Earlier today, we heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Iran, for the second time in the space of 5 months,
launched a direct attack on Israel. This is totally unacceptable, and the entire world should condemn it. We have demonstrated once again our commitment to Israel's defense. We'll remain in very close touch with Israel and other partners in the region in the hours and days ahead.
Let's bring in Andrew Boyd. He's the former chief of operations at the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center and a CBS News contributor. Thanks for being here. How surprising is it that this missile attack was largely intercepted and there, as of right now, don't appear to be any or many casualties?
I'm not surprised. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, the Arrow missile systems are quite effective, as well as the support that the Jordanians and the U.S. military provided. That is not surprising. I think I would have thought the Iranians would have learned this lesson back on 13 April when they launched 300 ballistic missiles as well as drones, and none of them made it to their targets. It would appear it would be the same, even though it was 180 plus ballistic missiles and no drones.
So does that mean then that this was maybe sort of if they knew that it wouldn't be effective, it is still some kind of response to what they see as, of course, the targeted killings of the head of Hamas and Hezbollah?
I think it was they were trying to replicate what they did in April. The only difference is that I think there's a great deal of resolve in Israel amongst the Israeli populace where they want these external threats to go away. I think there's a lot of discussion. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on another network was talking about the potentiality of attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. So I do think there's going to be a lot of pressure within Israel to retaliate, and the Iranians may have miscalculated on this one.
What level of response do you expect from Israel?
The Israelis are in the driver's seat on this. It could be a symbolic retaliation. I suspect it will be more intense than what we saw in April. It may be an attack on a military facility. It may be an attack on an energy facility, a nuclear or oil distribution. But I suspect there will be a significant retaliation. Prime Minister Netanyahu and other politicians in Israel have been signaling as such.
Andrew Boyd, thank you.
It's the most dangerous time we've had, certainly since the end of the Second World War. I think it could end up being a world war. You have two hot spots, and you'll probably have a third, maybe with Taiwan. But you have Ukraine and Russia, and that's out of control. I met with President Zelensky, and I got along very well with President Putin. I think I can get it solved.
That was former President Donald Trump moments ago reacting to the situation unfolding in the Middle East. Let's bring in our panel. Tricia McLaughlin, Joel Payne, and Evan McMorris Santoro join us now. Tricia is a former senior advisor to Vivek Ramaswamy's presidential campaign. Joel is a CBS News political contributor, and Evan is a politics reporter for the Washington publication Notice. So we're going to talk about this and all things debate tonight. But Tricia, first of all, we know that foreign policy is going to come up, especially because of these developments. How does Vance set himself apart in terms of how he proves to the American people he's ready?
Well, of course, J.D. Vance did serve in the military, as did Tim Walz. I wouldn't be surprised, obviously, if J.D. Vance brings up the issues with Walz's service, potential fabrication. That being aside, on the foreign policy front, what I would advise him to say is that Iran is $100 billion richer than they were when Donald Trump was in office. And why is that? Because Tim Walz's defense is that no sanctions were lifted by the Biden-Harris administration. That technically isn't true. Actually, they just disqualified their proxies. So there was different ways for Iran to get their oil outside of the country and able to fund their terrorist activities, including funding those ballistic missiles that they just shot at Israel earlier today.
Joel, if that comes up, how do you expect Walz to respond?
I think Walz is going to follow what Kamala Harris has been talking about, which is about how Donald Trump shows up on the world stage and how J.D. Vance is a part of a Trump-Vance administration would show up, which is provoking Russia to be more aggressive in the war in Ukraine, and also talking about Donald Trump and provocative actions in the Middle East and how that could inflame the situation. I think there is actually a lot of fodder for both candidates to discuss here. I also think it's just notable that whoever wins this election, it's very likely that the first 100 days of the next administration is going to be consumed by these two hotspots in the world. What's happening, obviously, in Ukraine with Putin's advance in Ukraine, and obviously what's happening in the Middle East. And, this just goes to show that any presidency, your best laid plans can be put to the side by world events.
Let's put foreign policy aside for a second and talk about some of the meat and bones of the debate tonight. Evan, you have reporting on what journalists kind of call expectation setting. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I actually can go off of what we were just talking about as well with this, which is, the thing about a VP debate is that these two guys are going to be on stage. They don't make the policy for the administration. They're going to be the vice president of the administration. Their job on the debate stage is to forward their presidential nominees' policies and to not damage them, right? And so when it comes to the foreign policy stuff, a tough situation is that you have, for example, Harris is coming off of as the vice president of a president who is very attached to foreign policy. And so she has to sort of forge her own path, but that's sort of a challenge for her because of just the overarching power of Biden when it comes to foreign policy. And Trump, we don't know what he thinks about a lot of this stuff, right? He has said when confronted about these wars and things that are going on, he just says, well, if I was president, it wouldn't be happening. But they are happening, and they need to be answered for. And so the challenge that Vance has is Vance has to tell people that Trump actually has some forward-thinking plans about this stuff and not just looking backwards at his old presidency.
Patricia,
and so,
does he
I
say
think
that?
That's part of the expectation setting that we're dealing with.
We'll go back to that. But is that effective for the campaign? And that's why they keep saying it. If this just wouldn't be happening, it's not. You can't prove it.
Well, we can prove his past record, which we know that the last 4 years, the world that Biden-Harris inherited from Donald Trump, it is now a whole lot less safe, whether it be in Venezuela, whether it be in Ukraine, whether it be in the Middle East now. So Donald Trump does have a record of peace, which Biden-Harris, you can laugh at that as much as you want, but that's just simply true. Were we at war under Donald Trump? No, we weren't. And now we are likely to face some major
He faced
wars.
criticism for some of his precarious relationships.
Well, but did that advance U.S. interests? Absolutely. Look, we were facing peace. Now we have 40,000 troops in the Middle East, and we're sending more.
I think that's certainly going to be Donald Trump's argument, and I think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have actually done a good job of using that aggressiveness against Donald Trump by talking about his lack of sobriety on the world stage and the fact that he's not respected and that he's easily played and easily turned around by flattery and things like that. That's what Kamala Harris did well in her DNC speech. I also think looking introspectively at Kamala Harris, it's notable to me that Kamala Harris is going to have to at some point put some distance between herself and the Biden administration on the Middle East. She's getting the benefit of the doubt right now. I don't know how long that the coalition that she's very carefully holding together is going to give her the space to do that. She's done it now. I think she's probably got till very shortly after the election to kind of turn the page from the Biden policy there.
Evan, I do want to bring you in again on your reporting on expectation setting.
Oh, okay. Well, leading up to this, right, we've seen both sides talk about how the other guy is going to be incredible at this, right? We've seen a lot of reporting coming out about Tim Walz telling Kamala Harris when he was selected as vice president, I'm a terrible debater. I just got to warn you, I'm a terrible debater, right? And then meanwhile, Vance has talked about, he hasn't done this very much. He's just a new senator. We don't really know what's going to happen. And the fact of the matter is, both of these guys have spent a long career in public service. They both have been around politics for a very long time. And they've been practicing and training for this moment for days and days and days. But I think we've seen a very interesting kind of expectation setting in this debate, because part of this one is coming off of the last debate where the Trump campaign felt that they were somehow mistreated by the live fact checking that happened and the way that Harris was able to get under Trump's skin. They felt like this was like sort of unfair. So we've seen in some of their debate prep that they've already started to go after moderators, already started to go after the hosts, this lovely network that's hosting the debate. They're already doing that because they're preparing for that sort of post-debate moment where, if they win, they'll say, hey, we bested this really hard situation that we were in. And if they lose, they'll say, well, it was rigged against us the entire time, right? And so this expectations game has been very different now, I think, given the nature of what happened in that last debate and how impactful it was in terms of the narrative for Trump and Harris.
Let's talk about the spin room. We have about less than a minute left. What is your take on the people that each side has decided to bring into the spin room? For you, the likes of Katie Britt, we've got Jason Miller, some of the familiar names.
I think those are a lot of people that J.D. Vance surrounded himself with to debate prep, which I think is interesting in and of itself. I'll be interested to see if his wife shows up. That would be, I think, fantastic for him. I hope he reintroduces himself to the American people tonight. That's what I'm really looking for.
Spin room's great. Ed and Caitlin are doing a great job from there. This is all going to be about clips after the debate, stuff that's going to go on TikTok, on YouTube, things that are consumable for the broader public.
Well said. Tricia McLaughlin, Joel Payne, and Evan McMorris-Santoro, thank you all so much. Governor Tim Walz's addition to the Democratic presidential ticket was unexpected just a few months ago. We'll check in with our CBS Minnesota reporter about what Walz intends to do to succeed on the debate stage tonight. You're streaming America Decides.
And welcome back to a special edition of America Decides. Tonight, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz will be tested like never before when he takes the debate stage against Ohio Senator J.D. Vance.
Walz gained notoriety by referring to former President Donald Trump and his allies as, quote, weird. But he's also been accused by Republicans of being too liberal on the issues. So let's bring in Caroline Cummings. She's a reporter with CBS News Minnesota and joins us from here in New York City. She's helping us out tonight with coverage. Caroline, as someone who's covered Governor Walz in his home state, what are you looking for tonight as this debate begins?
Well, good evening to you, Ed and Caitlin. It's so great to be with you. So obviously tonight, front and center is Iran's missile strikes on Israel. And I'm curious how he handles that issue and any questions related to it, because he is a governor of Minnesota. He is really well versed in handling crisis in his own state. But when it comes to foreign policy, that is not his strong suit. So I'll be watching for how he handles that, since it's, of course, a really timely issue facing the global stage tonight, and something that will be relevant to him, of course, if he is elected vice president and is in the room for those key negotiations and discussions about foreign policy. I'm also looking to see how he handles scrutiny about his record. Some of these issues have been litigated before, namely his response, the state's response to the 2020 riots in Minneapolis that followed George Floyd's murder. He has been on the record many times answering those questions, but Senator J.D. Vance, who has already attacked him for it on the campaign trail, it's sure to be brought up again. So I'll be curious how he handles that fresh national scrutiny on some of those, issues with his record or parts of his record that have faced scrutiny in the past, guys.
Yeah, Caroline, on that note, I mean, Governor Walz is in his second term as governor. What are some key moments, in addition to what you just described, from his tenure that you also think might come up tonight?
Well, I think he'll use this as a chance to talk about some of his accomplishments, bills he has signed into law that are really popular policies. I'm talking about free breakfast and lunch for all kids in school, regardless of income, or expanding background checks for gun sales and transfers. He will also probably talk about how Minnesota, after the Dobbs decision, codified abortion rights, doubled down, said, Minnesotans have a fundamental right to not only abortion, but also fertility and contraception. And that's a point that he has often talked about on the campaign trail, right, as he tries to contrast himself with Senator J.D. Vance. He talks about his stances on abortion and tries to characterize them as backwards and out of touch with Americans. So I'm sure he'll use that moment to try to talk about what Minnesota did quickly in response to Roe versus Wade being overturned. He also will likely, be asked about, those riots, like I mentioned, but also how he handled the COVID-19 pandemic. That marked mostly the entirety of his first term, or a large part of his first term was marked by how he handled the COVID-19 pandemic. And he also, what's a little bit lost to the national audience, or lost on the national audience, I should say, is that he had to govern in a divided legislature for the entirety of his first term. So he had to work with Republicans across the aisle in order to pass state budgets, to get anything done. So all of these progressive bona fides, these progressive laws that have passed, those have been within the last 2 years since Democrats took back total control of the state capitol. So if he's trying to reach across the aisle, if you will, and appeal to independents or Republicans on the fence, it might be to showcase that, hey, I've worked with Republicans, I know how to govern and get things done in a state, regardless of people's political beliefs, guys.
All right, Caroline Cummings, it looks like quite a scene behind you. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
I've seen West 57th so boisterous before.
Thank
Must
you.
be a vice presidential debate happening.
And former President Jimmy Carter today is celebrating his 100th birthday. CBS News was invited along for an exclusive look at the 39th President of the United States as he made a rare appearance at a gathering in his backyard surrounded by friends and family in Plains, Georgia.
A military flyover, as you see there, consisting of 4 fighter jets, flew over the party in Carter's honor. The former president's grandson, Jason, recently spoke to 60 Minutes about his grandfather's legacy.
His 4 years in the White House was a remarkable time with significant achievements. That work after the White House, those 40 years where he and my grandmother worked together on the issues that they cared about, really are the fundamental part of their legacy.
Carter is the longest living U.S. president in history and the only former president to become a centenarian. The Democrat and former peanut farmer was elected in 1977 on the heels of Republican fatigue following the Watergate scandal.
Since then, he's devoted his time to humanitarian causes, which won him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Jason Carter recently said his grandfather's goal is to vote for Kamala Harris on Election Day. We wish him a happy birthday. Coming up, the Taylor Swift effect.
That for a segue. We have new voter registration numbers in some key states, and it's giving us some answers on what the impact of the pop star's endorsement of Kamala Harris may be. You're streaming America Decides.
Tonight's vice presidential debate is another opportunity for the candidates to boost excitement for their campaigns. We saw a boost in enthusiasm following the presidential debate, but CBS News also found the majority of people see their vote in 2024 mattering more than it did in 2020. One way we can measure voter enthusiasm is by looking at changes in voter registration. So to talk about that, Tom Bonnier joins me now. He's a senior advisor at Target Smart, which analyzes voter registration data. Thanks for being here. You've shared with us new data on voter registration. In those 2 days following Taylor Swift's endorsement of Kamala Harris, Pennsylvania, Democratic voter registration was 88% higher than it was for the same period in 2020. Who are these newly registered voters, and how does this compare to Republicans?
Yeah, this is an interesting stat, as you said. We're getting the first look at this now, this period. Keeping in mind, this was the debate, then the Taylor Swift endorsement, really all at the same time, or a 1-2 punch. What we're seeing, it's not just Democrats, as you said, it's younger voters. So over 60% of the new registrants in that time period were under the age of 30. We compared to the baseline 4 years earlier, the exact same time period, where young voters were only 45% of the new registrants. On top of that, young women, especially young women of color, young Latino women almost tripling their voter registration rate, and young black women more than doubling their registration rate in Pennsylvania in just that time period right after the debate and the Taylor Swift announcement.
Fascinating. Youth voter registrations in Texas and Florida in particular also increased by 45% in the days following the debate and the Swift endorsement. It's similarly weighted toward Democrats. Earlier, we had Senator Warren on the show. She said she believes Democrats can flip Senate seats in those states. Is there any merit to that?
Well, this data says yes. There's a reason that Democrats are now bullish on these 2 states, and they're looking to expand the map, and they're actually spending money there. When we looked at the voter registration data in Texas, similar to what we saw in Pennsylvania, in some cases actually bigger, the Democratic share of new registrants increased by 99% in that 2 or 3 day period, whereas the Republican share was actually 9% lower. Again, seeing big increases among Latino voters in both of those states, young black women. So similarly, you're seeing that just huge increase in intensity and enthusiasm following the debate.
You have new data out of Montana, not a state we typically talk about, not a battleground state. What's happening there, and why does it matter?
Well, in Montana, it's the state that's most likely at this point, based on the numbers, to decide who controls the Senate after the election. And we don't have a lot of polling data there, unfortunately. And so the voter registration data is perhaps our best window into how things are looking. What we saw is in the 2-month period, again, after Vice President Harris became the nominee, and we've seen this intensity and enthusiasm among Democrats, we saw this big increase in registrations among Native American voters. In Montana, they have the potential to be a deciding factor in that election. In a state, they'll probably only have about 500,000 people vote.
Tom Bonnier, thanks so much for joining us. We are a little more than an hour out from the first and only planned vice presidential debate right here on CBS News. We'll have special coverage continuing at 8 p.m., but let's go back to the spin room for some final thoughts from Caitlin Huey-Burns and Ed O'Keefe. I thought I saw you guys out of the corner of my eye taking a selfie.
We might have done that.
We may have done that.
Guilty?
Not our first rodeo,
No.
but we've been having a lot of fun here as this room is starting to become really crowded. We've had senators come through.
Yep.
We've seen several different lawmakers. Top Trump advisor is right behind us, talking to the press ahead of tonight. The countdown to the debate is just an hour. The countdown to Election Day is
35 days. 35 days as of tonight to go until Election Day. Of course, early voting is underway
in 20
about
states.
20 states, right? So there could be somebody sitting at home tonight going, you know what, I got to wait and see what the running mate's like. I'll cast my ballot tomorrow after I watch tonight, which is a big reason why this should be done tonight. For those of you who've joined us later in the evening, we are at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York, one of the largest studio spaces in the Big Apple. Studios that are normally used by talk shows, game shows in the past. CBS Sports is down the hall. One of the studios right through that wall is where the debate will be happening in a little more than an hour. Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan, of course, moderating the debate between Republican J.D. Vance and Democrat Tim Walz. And then we'll be here in this room afterward to hear from both sides as to how they think it went. And we'll probably get a little bit of that. What he meant to say was ... as we often do in spin rooms. And then we'll go from there. The last big tentpole moment of this election,
right?
Unless for some reason tomorrow, Trump and Harris say, let's do it again.
I mean, this could be the last word, and this could be really the last chance these campaigns have to change the trajectory of the race. I mean, we've been talking about how the past 2 months, so much has happened, but I'm reminded that today is October. What October surprise could come?
Yeah.
We've already had so many summer surprises.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get one tonight.
I'm pulling the notes because consider this. Vance has only been the vice presidential candidate now for 78 days as of tonight. Walz only 56 days. So neither of these guys terribly well known by the broader American public, even though they're a name and a face now that maybe are known to a lot of Americans. Tonight's their chance to really get a good sense of who they are, what they do, what they've done, and how they are under pressure.
And they were picked in part to kind of appeal to similar voters.
Right.
White working class voters in the Midwestern states, that blue wall that we talk about all the time. Does tonight move the needle among any in that group? We'll see. But it's fascinating. Could it be more different? But in terms of that sliver that they're trying to attract, we'll see.
Lindsay, 4 hours with you, we'd do it anytime.
Show your art again. Are you available for my kid's next birthday for her birthday banners?
The graphics department's okay with this. They'd rather use theirs, but this is the low tech. Started during the pandemic, but it keeps going. 35 to go.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Ed O'Keefe, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. That does it for me, but the night's just getting started here at CBS News. The media gathered outside the broadcast center in the heart of New York City, inside the spin room full of surrogates for the vice presidential candidates ready to go to bat for their picks. Down the hall, the stage is set for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance's first meeting and the only planned VP debate this election cycle. My colleagues John Dickerson and Cecilia Vega are standing in New York's Times Square. They will take over coverage after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.